we're here at this terrific conference, a huge conference, first time in DC, which is awesome, with jobs for the future. So let's get started by actually talking about jobs for the future and the impact that AI might have in your respective states. So given that you're elected officials, you're sort of watching the state's economy with a bird's eye view. Are there specific sectors you're particularly hearing about that you think might be impacted, different things? Yeah, and I thought from your tech sector background, we'll start with Senator Gonzalez.
Oh my goodness, that's a really good question. I mean, I think we're at such a unique moment where artificial intelligence and the next generation of it, so we talk Gen AI and large language models, will leave pretty much no sector untouched. So bird's eye view, yes, we're keeping an eye across, but I think, as regulators, we're excited about that opportunity. I see it a lot like a car. It's like it can get us to some places that are new, can get us there quickly, but we haven't built out the roads, the stop signs, the infrastructure around it. So we're looking at, which industries do we need to do that the quickest? And I think about things like healthcare sometimes. I think that's been brought up a lot. Of course, we're looking first internally and thinking about the public sector and public sector use, as my colleague mentioned. And so we started with a bill called the Loading Act to regulate public sector use of artificial intelligence. And then, of course, not a sector, but this year we also worked on legislation called the FAIR Act around elections because that was top of mind. So yes, we're looking at the economy, but also we're kind of like, where do we need to go first? And in a big election year and with government, I think those were two of the first places we wanted to start.
I think that's always a challenge whenever I think we all talk a lot about AI policy and sort of AI issues, like it's like one issue and then you start to dive in, there's 1,000. Senator Maroney, sectors, areas that you're particularly focused on?
Yeah, and one of the things in traveling around to a lot of conferences, as you mentioned, AI is going to really touch almost every sector. And so what I picked up on was double down where you're strong, right? And so what we've been looking at in Connecticut, I think, to start, I wanted to look at healthcare. We have Yale University, we have UConn, we have Jackson Labs. And so that's one of the things we were able to get $600,000 in the budget. We're going to work on creating algorithms that help reduce health inequities, right? Again, trying to use AI for good and incentivize that. And then we got money for the hospital systems to clinically integrate the algorithms, to de-risk them so we can get ideas in the funnel and then try to bring them to scale, right? Last year, we did a survey of businesses through CBI, Connecticut Business and Industry Association, 88, it may not have been 88, it's 80-something businesses responded. Half of them said they didn't expect to be using AI in the next 5 years. So what's that tell us? It tells us we need to work on vocabulary, right? People need to understand what we're talking about, but it also tells us those are small businesses and we have a lot of education to do. And so what we want to look at is we're strong in advanced manufacturing. Lockheed, RTX, Electric Boat are going to figure it out. This year, what we're doing is we're working with CASE, the Connecticut Academy of Scientists and Engineers. They're going to do a policy briefing for us. They're going to go out and interview 20 small businesses and try to talk through and tease through them. What are your needs? And so how can the state then help, right? Help them to integrate it into their processes or education and bring resources to them. Then the third area really is, we're strong in insurance and finance, fintech and insurtech. So I don't know if we need to incentivize that. I think our priority was, go to healthcare, go to the manufacturing, small businesses. But then our other priority is just general workforce. And so we were able to get some money for creating the Connecticut Online AI Academy, which is a free program. In the first cohort I went through last week. And basically it's done by Charter Oak State College. And we are looking at trying to make sure we're upskilling and reskilling people and giving everyone the opportunity to get that training for free. I think it was a month or so ago when there was the Microsoft LinkedIn study that came out. I don't know if it's a study, but the nice PowerPoint you can go through. 66% of companies said that they wouldn't hire someone without generative AI skills. 71% said that they would take someone with less experience in generative AI skills over someone with more experience. And so I just see these next 2 years as critical to getting out. And we were talking a little earlier, just making sure we're reaching out to as many people as possible and trying to partner with nonprofits, get out in the community. I met with the Workplace, which is one of our workforce investment boards. They do a program called Platform to Employment for long-term unemployed. Average age is over 50. Again, They may have more experience, but probably don't have the generative AI skills to talk with them. How can we integrate this into your program? We're also trying to reach out to nonprofits. How do we we're reaching with Boys and Girls Clubs to train the kids and hopefully get their parents to come in, right, to do a 2-gen. And if you've read the book, Recode America, I think one of the things they say in there is for a lot of people, it's not creating a new relationship with government, it's repairing a deeply broken relationship with government. And that's why I see nonprofits and partners as critical. We need third-party validators. I can't just tell someone, do this, it's good for you. We need someone on the ground who's out there and also in a culturally competent way, right? So that we can get out. I don't know how to reach all different populations, and we want to partner and make sure we're providing those opportunities. Connecticut, even though we're a small state, 97, 98% wired for high-speed internet. They did a digital equity survey. 27% of families are not connected to high-speed internet. 36% failed basic digital literacy. So we have to do a walk before we can run. Digital literacy, AI proficiency, then practitioner.
It's interesting talking about economy-wide, because I think what you just referenced in all of those sectors was pretty much, if you threw services and retail in there, it's the entire economy. So I want to talk a little bit about clearly top of mind workforce, and we'll come back to you, Senator Maroney, about some of those workforce efforts you've had, both in your bill but it's clear top of mind workforce impacts are huge. We know they're coming, and I'm interested to learn a little bit about kind of what your states are doing to prepare and what you're seeing that you think might work and what you see might need a little bit of improvement. Senator Gonzalez, I'm going to start with you. You did talk about you've been focused on AI and procurement, which I think is great, and we appreciate working with your office on that bill as it moved forward. But you've also introduced the Workforce Stabilization Act, which I wanted to give you a chance to talk about. So if you can just touch on workforce development progress at the state level and also your particular interest in it, that'd be great.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think, when we hear so many different studies that try to guess at something that we really don't know yet, which is what will the mass impact be in 2 years, in 5 years, in 10 years. And I think obviously a lot of these studies, although they cannot agree on the number of jobs, say that a lot of roles will be automated and there's going to be mass impacts on our workforce. And naturally, as a legislator, we want to be responsive to those concerns. So the Workforce Stabilization Act is essentially a bill that requires companies to report on what jobs they're automating. And for companies that have over 100 employees, if they're automating a certain percentage, they would have to pay a surcharge to help in taxes to help, support our government in transitioning our workforce. And all of those funds from that revenue generated would go towards reskilling, upskilling, and workforce development. So it makes sense. It was a bill that I introduced with Senator Michelle Hinchy, who in New York is an upstate senator. And I think that's really important because we're seeing, as someone who represents New York City, the entire state unified in this concern. It's not just a city concern. Folks in rural parts of New York also are sharing those concerns. But it's not the only thing we're doing, introducing legislation. Earlier this year's budget, we invested in Empire AI, which is a historic investment in higher education for not only creating a public large language model, so creating the actual infrastructure, but supporting SUNYs, our state universities, and CUNYs, our city universities, in creating new programs, new seats, and creating a clear pipeline for the next generation. But I do want to highlight that when we talk about workforce, a couple of things that my colleague, Senator Maroney, brought up that are so essential, which is it doesn't just start with higher education. It doesn't just start mid-career. We really still need to think about, broadly, how many folks are struggling with the digital divide, right? It's not just a workforce issue. It's getting a large segment of our population online. We struggle with the same thing in New York City, even though we have around the same percentage of connectivity in the state, 97, 98%. You'll find that over 30% are saying they're struggling, or 36% of students in New York City public schools are struggling with just basic internet access. And so for me, it's both introducing legislation that's forward-looking and trying to prepare us, but also really intentionally going back and saying, hey, if we care about our workforce, we need to address the digital divide, address equity issues, And I'm really proud of the work and investment we've made there. I think our federal government has taken it very seriously with also historic funding coming down the pipeline. And I think, finally, I would say when we talk about AI, though, it's like two buckets for me, because we have automated decision-making systems and AI we use every single day and have been using for decades. So we're still trying to get people, we still need people who do know coding. We still need people who do understand those systems, while also simultaneously starting with this second, or, looking at the new bucket, Gen AI and large language models, that's the big unknown, right? Like, what do we do? What is the future of work? What do those jobs look like? And even this morning mentioned, we're not entirely sure. So I see them in two buckets and trying to kind of look back while looking forward.
I think that's a great perspective, particularly around, and we've talked about this, I think, in different contexts of, there's one being ready to address challenges, and then there's another being prepared to figure out what the challenges that are coming look like. And I think we're in the former, not the latter. Senator Maroney, we're going to talk a little bit about AI policy at the state level, and you're clearly a leader in that, and that is really a wonderful mantle that you've taken on. We've worked with a number of states, and we're really pleased when your bill came out earlier this year to not only address the safeguards that we thought were necessary, but also workforce issues alongside of it. And I think it was relatively unique in tackling both of those at the same time. Can you talk a little bit about the kind of what the decision was to add workforce and what those provisions looked like a little?
Yeah, thank you. So it was basically, and I know every state is different, right, in how they do things and how they attack things. We do tend to have a lot of aircraft carrier big bills in Connecticut, and they allowed me, it was a Senate priority, to tackle these different issues that were a lot of passions for me. I think looking at them, it makes sense, right? If you're going to look at the automated decision-making along with the skills, right, at the same time. And one of the things, we're looking at, the percentage of companies who are using AI for screening resumes, right? So if we're not stopping, we're not pausing to make sure that there aren't biases creeping in, right? That we aren't having disparate impacts on different groups, we're at a risk of, again, leaving people behind. The same, my big concerns are in government services, in employment, and in housing, right? And in the same as in, we're seeing a lot of large landlords are using automated decision-making for screening tenants. There's always the examples coming back of people who had, whether it's wrong information attached, someone with their name did something different. There's an example like that from Connecticut. So I think it's critical that we look at those things now, but I also think it's critical to look at and build those skills in employees to make sure, and as Senator Gonzalez said, to make sure we're being intentional in how we do that, and that we're reaching out to try to use this, in many ways, COVID was a reset. This can also be a reset, right? And if we're not thoughtful in how we do it, we're going to bake in those two worlds, right? And I think they talk about the two worlds. It was a book I was just reading, Benjamin Disraeli talked about the two worlds, the rich and the poor. It's going to be those who are connected and those who aren't, and it will become the rich and the poor if we're not being thoughtful and reaching out. So that's one of the things we wanted to do. And then just looking at the skills and trying to figure out what was needed, but then giving people the basic tools, right? And one of the things we found, so we created a certificate program in generative AI at Norwalk Community College that launched earlier this year. We've tasked the State Department of Education with coming up with a curriculum to share to all of the schools. We're trying to look at some of the pilot programs and expand them around to the schools. And in the Connecticut Online AI Academy, the generative, Amazon had created a certificate in generative AI. One of the most important skills, and it's been talked about for a while, is that lifelong learner, right? We need to prepare people because, as you've said, we're early on. We don't know what's going to happen. I like to point out, I was an economics major in college, so I like to share this joke because we have all these studies telling us what might happen. And the question is, what would you not reach if you laid all of the economists in the world end to end? A conclusion. So we're in the first inning. We don't necessarily know what's going to happen, but we're trying to learn, right? We're trying to look back and see, okay, technological disruptions are nothing new, right? Technological unemployment, as a term was coined in the 1920s with the automated assembly line. When the internet came out, right, we thought we were going to lose all of these jobs. And when electric typewriters came out, all of these different things, we've ended up with more jobs. But we do need to be intentional, as you've said. And when you look at, Indeed did a report on percentage of skills that can be replaced by generative AI. And, two of the top ones are customer service representative, and administrative assistant. And a lot of so our friend Michelle Maldonado, Delegate Maldonado from Virginia, in one of the meetings, I said, well, it's not AI that's going to take your job, it's someone who knows AI. She said, well, that's not necessarily true, right? Because a lot of careers will be disrupted and will be gone. And they're typically, a lot of them are careers that are done by women and women of color. And so we need to make sure we're trying to be thoughtful, intentional, including as many voices as possible in developing good policy.
Okay, I want to zoom out a little to the theoretical, just a little. We have Europe has moved forward. They have the EU AI Act in place. We have the federal government moving forward haltingly, but with the NIST AI risk management framework, which is laying some positive foundation. We have Colorado as the first in the country. I know you're both familiar with that work. I want to ask. We are in DC, so I'm gonna lead in this a little bit. But so what, like, just at a theoretical level, what is the role of the government in regulating ethical AI? And then something that I know you're going to have an opinion on, whether you offer your actual opinion, will be what's the role of the state government versus the federal government in this space?
Oh my goodness. How much time do we have? Oh my gosh. So yeah, that's a really great question. What framework are we looking at this with? What is the role of government? And then of course, state versus federal. So in that first bucket, I think for me, it's been really important to not just think about a risk-based approach, but a rights-based approach. And, when I worked in tech, everything was about risk management, right? How it's assumed we're going to have risk. It's to what degree we're prepared for it. Yes, that works. And coming from the role of government, what are the fundamental rights for my constituents that I am trying to preserve? And that looks like, rights to privacy, of course, like the right to not be discriminated against, so mitigating bias, and, right to organize. One thing I didn't bring up earlier, but unions are a really big part of this conversation too. One of the biggest bills I passed this year around, again, public sector use of AI was with the AFL-CIO and the Public Employees Federation, PEF, two unions that helped us write language that actually protected certain jobs. So it's the first in the country to do that because they have, as unions, the right to organize. So I think that's been the approach we're looking at. And then role of state versus federal. I mean, yes, a lot of this should be addressed at the federal level. I've spoken to our federal partners. I think we're on the same page about a lot of things. And states have the ability to be more agile, move a little bit faster. And I think we have to do that. We have a responsibility to step up and say, if we're not going to have anything federally passed right away, what can we do, within the different states? And I think that's where, and I'm sure we're going to talk about this later, we've been trying to, be cognizant of the fact that it also isn't a successful system to have a patchwork of legislation across the states. And that's why we want to start coordinating across states. And so Senator Maroney has been leading the work to do a multi-state task force where we actually get to talk to each other and have these conversations so that we are a little bit more uniform in our approach. And I think that's something new I've seen and really appreciated. And I think that is the role of the state. But yeah, protecting our fundamental rights, I think, is a very short answer to a really philosophical question. But I'm curious, Senator Maroney, what you think.
Thank you. Again, one of the great things of doing these is you get to learn, right? And I like your thoughts of the rights-based as well as the risk-based. And Senator Gonzalez and I are on a leadership committee together of a group of people, and we're working with over 30 states, bipartisan across the country. We're meeting every other week for the next 5 months. We did it last year to try to come up with the framework and work together. Again, the argument is you don't want the patchwork with all different states, but just as AI or the internet doesn't stop at state borders, it doesn't stop at country borders. And we know that Canada is coming out with automated decision regulations. They're supposed to be out in 2025. We know that the EU will go in effect in 2026. California Privacy Protection Agency is going to be voting on their rulemaking. There's still AB 2930, which is very similar, which they have till August 31st. So there still are a lot of potential bills out there this year. My guess is, by next year there will be a lot more. I would say another dozen or so states. But I think a lot of us, and the reason why we've come together, why we see this urgency, is a lot of us feel we messed up when you look back to the internet when that came out. And again, a lot of things you look at is correct by construction. If we had built a lot of the websites now with data privacy in mind, they would have been built differently from the beginning, right? And so we don't want to do the same thing again. I think it's more expensive in the long run to just get out and let the entrepreneurs run with it without having any clear red lines. And actually, from what I hear, my brother at his company, they're not investing yet because they want to know what the guidelines are. And so I think that having a clear path is actually the better way forward, working together with industry. And there was a webinar recently where they said, when the government and industry work together to create good regulations, it's pro-innovation. And that's what we're really trying to do. And I think the states are the laboratories, right? And we've seen with data privacy, right? The federal government hasn't had a comprehensive data privacy bill since 1998, COPPA. But we've seen the states have iterated, and except for California, the rest of us are working within a common framework and pushing, everyone pushes it a little bit forward, and we're learning from the other states. And, Minnesota's data privacy bill that passed this year actually has some AI things in it that they talk about in terms of the profiling, the automated decision making. It gives the right to get an explanation. And I think to correct the data if you see your explanation was based on faulty data. So we are seeing some of these things get pushed through the data privacy bills.
Can I also add to that? I think one of the things too that's so important about the red lines for us is we always get asked, this is such a rapidly developing economy, rapidly developing technology. How do you write legislation that lasts? And I think that part of it is, when we're really clear about what the red lines are and the guidelines, what we're trying to protect, then it actually is just a North Star that helps guide when we encounter new problems that we haven't encountered before. But I think also part of, and I'm sure you've been hearing this too, part of the struggle is not only those questions, but then how do we, the question between industry, public sector is, let's not over-regulate, right? Let's not stifle any innovation. And to that, I think, to Senator Maroney's point, that's where the collaboration has been so important for us. We meet with, the private sector, we meet with advocacy organizations, we meet with academics, and we have this broad stakeholder group that helps inform the best possible version of a bill, so that we're not, we're actually being really mindful and again, also intentional in our language and definitions, so that we can leave ourselves open to the opportunities of new technology, while also again being, clear on what we'd like to see for our constituents. So yeah, I don't know if you've heard some of that too and been feeling some of that tension, but yeah.
I do want to emphasize the point that you made, Senator Maroney, which is typically there has been this tension between regulation and innovation. And I think we're moving to a place where that tension needs to evaporate. And for the most part, speaking from our perspective, we want people to trust the software that we want to provide services with, and people don't use software they don't trust. And so for us, it's actually innovation through regulation, just as you described, which I think is great.
And thank you for recognizing that. I think that until people feel safe, we're not going to get full adoption, right? Maslow's hierarchy, the first thing we need to do is feel safe. And there was an article a professor at Yale had done on data privacy and saying that when people were more comfortable with how their data was being used, they're more likely to share it. And that came out before Apple changed their privacy settings. We saw that in the EU, where they have the GDPR, people opt in at twice the rate they do in the US to share their data. And if you look at Pew Research each year in December, they have a study over the last 3 years, the percentage of Americans who are more optimistic than concerned about AI has flipped. It's now there's only 10% of the people, and I'm in that 10%, who are more optimistic than concerned. 58% of the people are more concerned than optimistic about AI. And I think it's over 60% who don't think the government will go far enough in regulating.
And at the same time, we've seen studies that say that 80% of businesses believe that they absolutely have to have AI to remain competitive. What are they going to use it for? They're still trying to figure that out. So the rate of adoption is something we just haven't seen. Did you want to comment, or I was going to ask a question? No, you're good to go.
I mean, data transparency just goes both ways. I think it's like both like people will feel more comfortable to share it, but I also think part of the trust building exercise right now is how reluctant the private sector, some companies have been on releasing their training data or being transparent. I think people also deserve to know how their data is being used. And I think that was a huge conversation when we saw like WGA, like, SAG-AFTRA striking, I think last year, and then of course this year as well. So I think it's creating a future where there's transparency, where people feel comfortable to be transparent and share their data, and vice versa. And I think that's the healthy ecosystem we're working towards.